Let's look at an awesome but slightly dumb sword fight in the film Revenger from 2018. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. I teach people how to sword fight. I deal in antique weapons, so I'm here to review this sword fight from the not massively well known in the West film called Revenger from 2018, which is from South Korea. I won't spoiler the film for you other than to say that this fight happens on an island filled with dangerous people, criminals and such like, and the main character, main protagonist, is a police detective who's on the island for reasons I won't explain. We're going to see various forms of edged weapon used here, basically machetes and makeshift weapons, whatever's available. I'm actually holding a Thai or Burmese da here, made by Siamese Edge, which is vaguely similar to the weapon, I grabbed it because it's vaguely similar to the weapon that the hero uses here, although I don't want you to think that necessarily da are used in Korea, because in Korea actually weapons are more similar to both Chinese and Japanese weapons. But anyway, these are a random assemblage of modern weapons because this is set in modern times and they're using whatever edged weapons they can get their hands on. Before we dive into this, I just want to say that I really enjoy this fight. I think it's really good. I think it's a good movie fight, but it has some dumb aspects in it from a real martial arts or tactics point of view, and so because that's what I do on my channel, that's what I'm going to talk about. So don't see this as a criticism of the film or even necessarily this as a choreographed movie fight, because it's pretty well done, but I want to point out some of the things that are dumb compared to real life in this fight. So let's dive into this. So straight up there, we see that the baddie or baddies, because there's a couple actually, are basically using machetes. They're just typical bushcraft machetes of the type that I use in my garden, or you might use if you go yomping through the jungle. Whereas the hero is using a sword which is, and that's why I grabbed this one, sort of similar to a Burmese da. So it's longer than a machete, but it's not as long as most swords, but it has a fairly elongated grip, although they are primarily used one-handed, and the extra grip gives a bit of extra balance. The length of the weapon is important here, okay? So remember that the hero's weapon is slightly longer than the machetes. Right, so first up, he's got two opponents. One of them has one machete and one of them has a pair of machetes. Now, the first thing to say is that when you're in this kind of scenario where you are against two people, you clearly both want different things. Okay, you don't want to be fighting two people. You want to end this fight as quickly as possible. Most importantly, you might concentrate your attack, if you're being tactical and sensible, you might concentrate your attack on one person and take out one person as quickly as possible, or at least maim them in some way. For example, hobble them, disable their leg, hamstring them, cut them in the thigh, hit them in the hand, this kind of thing. So put them at least semi out of the fight so that you can then concentrate on the fully abled other person. But most importantly, you can see that our hero here is between the two opponents. This is the worst possible place to be, okay? When you're fighting multiple opponents, and this could be self-defense or it could be dueling on screen or whatever else, what you want to do is try and get your opponents in the way of each other so they are blocking each other, colliding with each other, and they can't just attack you from two different directions, because you can easily fight in one direction or even a range of directions, you know, kind of 90 degrees around here, but you can't really fight in 360 degrees very well. You can do it. There's things you can do to try and get out of that situation, which we probably won't talk about here. Maybe that's for another video. But by and large, you want to keep your opponents at least within visual range of you so that you're not having to turn from one to the other to see both of them. So he's ended up in a terrible position. What he should do, in my opinion at this point, is run backwards towards that building over here behind him and get the building behind him. Okay, because that prevents a person from getting around behind him. So getting something behind you, an obstacle even on the ground, I can see there's a load of bodies there, even those, just anything, a tree, anything you can to your back will at least provide you with one direction that you don't have to worry about defending. Right, let's carry on with the fight. Right, okay, so there's a small thing, I know that was a very tiny bit, but the fact that he spins around, that's actually a good thing to do if you are surrounded by people. So often when we're talking about one-on-one fights, I say, don't turn your back on the opponent. Well, if your back's already to an opponent, you haven't got much choice. So actually spinning around, and it's something we see in the montante, the big two-handed sword sources, which actually have sections on how to fight against multiple opponents. It's one of the things that the big two-handed sword is arguably designed for, or at least excels at. You can also do it with a halberd as well. So anything that can cut and whirl around a big distance and outreach and outrange your opponents is a good thing. So it's good that he, you know, spun around, he's trying to keep them away. Bear in mind there is no armour here, and that's very, very important. These are edged, sharp weapons. They have not got gloves or gauntlets. They haven't got any protection on their legs, heads, anything else. Right. Right, okay. Oh, so he's just doing some focusing Zen stuff here. I guess this might work as intimidation, so I'm not going to mock it, because actually if you've got two kind of noobs with machetes, I don't know if these guys are noobs actually, but if they are noobs with machetes, you doing something which looks sort of kind of like you've been trained, it might possibly psych them out. Who knows? It might make them more reluctant to just charge in and attack you. But what I hate that he's done is he's planted himself between them, which is just the worst place to be. I know it's just a little move, but again, it adds to the fact that he is showing how badass he is. I think these guys both look intimidated and they're acting it well. So if your opponents do look intimidated or reluctant, you should build on that. You know, if they think you're a badass, make them think you're an even bigger badass. It can only advantage you in the fight. Right, okay, one little detail there. So he's doing pretty standard cross parries, okay, which is typical in, for example, Filipino martial arts, which I suspect this has got a it's leaning heavily on, probably on Filipino martial arts in terms of their choreography and their repertoire. But the opponent behind him here, you can just see there, has two machetes. Now, the funny thing about two weapons is it doesn't literally equate to twice as many attacks, and you know, it doesn't make you twice as good, okay, because you've only got one brain, and so generally speaking, one weapon is occupying the space of attacking, and so you will tend to do this type of thing. So yes, it does mean it is an advantage, but it's not double an advantage, okay? The other person's choosing to hold their weapon with two hands, which is another type of advantage because it's a leverage advantage. So it's quite interesting because he's actually fighting two relatively different opponents here. Right, I'm just going to stop there for a second. So a few interesting things. I absolutely love the parries that he's doing. They're really, really good. They'd look completely legit in HEMA or Filipino martial arts or any other martial arts that do blades well, of which I would say HEMA and Filipino are the main two. Oh, I know that's contentious. But he's doing really good precise form, and I love the fact that the actor has clearly trained a lot. I suspect is a practicing martial artist, or at least looks like one. And these two extras are almost certainly practicing martial artists. So they're very precise, very well executed. If you compare their movements in this with something like Game of Thrones, which is really a low, low bar, you'll see that the actors in Game of Thrones look absolutely trash most of the time. Not all of them, but most of the time when they're moving weapons around. Compared to these guys, you can tell these guys are used to moving these weapons. And I like the fact also he's now moved out of the middle of them. Look at that, he's got them in a line. This is exactly where he should have been at the beginning. So I love the fact that he's maneuvered out, got them in a line. And I also like the fact there was a big swoosh. In fact, if we go back for a second just here, let's see if we can see it. No, I didn't go quite back far enough. Try again. There we go, swoosh. So that big swoosh, you're going to want to do lots of those, and lots of the treatises that talk about fighting against multiple opponents really emphasize cutting to keep people away. Big circular motions to keep people at distance when you're dealing with multiple opponents. You wouldn't do that one-on-one, but against multiple opponents you have to fight in a different way. Right, let's carry on with this fight. Right, nice. Boom! Use of the elbow. I love when choreographers remember that you have an entire body. So yes, absolutely, you can kick, you can knee, you can headbutt, you can grab, you can disarm, you can wrestle, you can throw, you can elbow. And so that's brilliant that they put that in there. If I was going to be really nitpicky, I'd say the only thing is if he's got an opening to elbow, he probably would have an opening to elbow and then follow up with an attack that would have wounded, because an elbow is only going to shove someone, it's not going to wound them. However, he is dealing with multiple opponents, so at this point he might just be like, okay, get away, I've got to deal with this guy immediately. In fact, that's the case. Right, okay, whoosh, whoosh over the head. Now it's interesting, in real sparring, this, let's just go back and see that bit again. Whoosh, okay? Whoosh, whoosh over the head does not happen very much in sparring, whether it's kendo, modern Olympic fencing, HEMA, Filipino martial arts, doesn't matter, okay? The reason is that your hands and weapons move way quicker than people do this. Now, when it does happen, it's usually completely by accident because a person's already started going down as you go at their head. So it does occasionally happen, but deliberately ducking the head under a sword blow, the tip of the sword due to leverage is moving way faster than a punch can move. So yes, people can duck under punches, but punches are moving much slower than the tip of a sword. So it doesn't usually happen in real fights. I love that. Turn the back and boom. It's very cinematographic. Cinema, is that a word? It's very movie fight-ish. That's definitely not a word. In reality, if someone pulled that off in sparring, I would remember it for the rest of my life. Okay, you could definitely do it frontally, but turning your back on someone and doing it, nah, that's not going to happen. Anyway, let's carry on watching the fight. Oh, there was a really nice bit there, so I'm going to go back and show you that. So he knocked it. Oh, didn't quite go back far enough. This is a really actually fast fight, so it's going to be really critical of this, but it's actually really well choreographed. Right, so there was a bit where he, it's difficult to describe. So he knocked the machete off to the side and then he hit on the back of it to knock it down. If this was Fiore's longsword, this would be called breaking the thrust. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean against the thrust. It means you've pushed the opponent's weapon off to the side and now you beat it to the ground. Now with a longsword, something you can do at that point is stamp on the opponent's blade. And which means you basically stand on it, and then while you're standing on it, you chop them because they can't get their sword out in time to defend. But there's some really complex movements in here. I'm certain this is from FMA, Filipino martial arts. Right, let's watch that more. We've got him back to the other person at the moment. Okay, so it's good. So one good thing, it's a little bit difficult to see what the movements are because of the way it's been edited and filmed. But I do like the fact that he's highly mobile. And one simple thing you can do if you find yourself between two opponents, and this could be in friendly sparring in your HEMA club, or it could be in a self-defense situation in the street. If you find two opponents either side of you, run. Okay, just run any direction, because if you run in one direction, you'll find very quickly those two opponents are no longer either side of you, they are now more aligned behind you. They might be running after you, but they're now in line, so they're not either side of you. So commonly when we're doing melee games or kind of multiple opponent sparring, just running for a second and then stand your ground and fight, you'll find the two opponents have been dragged out into a line behind you. There we go, they're both in front of him. Good. He comes up to what we would call posta di finestra. Okay, so that's a guard position you find in lots of different sword systems in Asia, Africa, Europe, everywhere. So this guy with two machetes is a real problem, but general life advice for you. Machetes have got no hand protection. Admittedly, neither do swords like this, and even Japanese things like wakizashi and katana, they have a bit of hand protection, but not very much. So always, as old Manciolino said in 1531, always aim at what offends you the most and what's closest to you, their hands, okay? So if their hands are within reach, don't worry about chopping at their head or the torso or anything else, just go for the hand. Because if you get a good cut through the machete wielder's hand, they ain't going to be wielding a machete very well after that, okay? Let's see what happens next. No, just a little interesting detail there. So normally we hold with the dominant hand at the top and the less dominant hand at the bottom, but very often we let go with the top hand, with longsword for example, but I know that they do the same in Kenjutsu, to get extra reach. So if you swing the sword, both hands are liable to be hit by the opponent's sword, but then if you release out with the top hand, you get extra reach because it's now one side of your body instead of having both sides joined, and you've only got one hand on, so it's a smaller target, less likely to get hit. I don't know why he's doing that now. He ducked under a blow. Oh, that's nice there. Boom, nice smack to someone's neck. Again, I would question, okay, why would you do that? Well, it can sometimes be because you're covering the opponent's sword with your sword, so your hand is free, but you wouldn't be able to hit them with your sword because then their sword would be free. Nice, putting a kick in here, good high kick. The opponent kick. Oh, did he just kick the sword? I think he just kicked the sword. So a lot of people ask about kicks in swordsmanship, and this is one of the problems, is if you just kick, the opponent can just hit your leg with the sword, which is clearly not good. I mean, that could be the end. You know, if they hit an artery, you're going to bleed out. The only times we really kick in swordsmanship is when you've occupied the opponent's sword with your own sword. So if they cut here, number one, for example, and I cover, I'm now free to, you know, punch, kick, do whatever I need to do, wrap and disarm, but only because my sword is detaining their sword. If their sword is free, you don't wave around your limbs for them to hit you. Yeah, so you know, obviously being cut in the leg, usually if you can get to hospital, it's not going to be the end of you, but it would be pretty bad news in a fight because it would drastically change how you can move around, and possibly, as I say, you might bleed out. I mean, you've got, certainly in your thighs, you've got big arteries in your thighs, 30 seconds you might be unconscious. Like a lot of people talk about how we acknowledge or score hits in HEMA, or it could be kendo or modern Olympic fencing or anything else. And the problem is you never really know what a blow with a sword might do. It might hit clothes and the edge might not be properly aligned, so it might not cut properly. It might just be a superficial cut. Or it might cut into the bone and, you know, result in a wound that's going to be disabling for the rest of your life. Or it might go through an artery and you might bleed to death. It might go through muscle or tendon, which means that that limb doesn't work properly anymore. Or it might not. We just never know. And it's one of the problems with the sporting versions of martial arts is a hit, you never really know what that hit would have done. Right, okay, that's so a series of blows, bum, bum, bum. So this person is now more or less incapacitated. Those were drawing cuts, so they're not going to be terribly deep, but assuming that they're aimed at things like hamstrings and potentially at arteries and things like this, the person could die, not immediately, but in time. But moreover, they might be out of the fight, okay? I'm not sure where the other person is at this point, and this is one of the elephants in the room with multiple opponent situations in movies, is they often have to have one of the extras, one of the fighters, basically step out for a bit so that the hero can deal with one person. In reality, these two people would still be coming flying at him unless the other person's been incapacitated. And so the coup de grace, the finishing blow. So the guy is dead now. Minor macabre detail, and I'm sorry I have to be grim about this. Chopping in the top of the head is not a good idea. You're more likely to get your sword stuck. You're more likely to damage the sword, potentially chip the edge, potentially even break the blade. I know of historical examples of where swords break hitting people's heads. And it's not necessary in the situation because he just could have gone for the neck, as a headsman would do, an executioner headsman would do. So grim topic, I know, but this is unwise from a martial perspective. He should have gone, you know, thrust through the body or whatever, something that would be less likely to damage the sword or get stuck. It's there. Very much the end of that guy. Where's the other guy? Right, okay, I think that's a homage to Japanese martial arts where they often supposedly flick the blood off the blade. Having cut myself on blades, both in the kitchen and in the garden, including a really horrible one with a pruning saw, my experience is this doesn't flick very much blood off a blade. If there's blood on a blade, and to be fair, your blood doesn't normally flow until a few seconds afterwards. So usually if you cut through yourself, there isn't any blood on the blade. But even if there is, blood's quite sticky. And if you do this, you're still going to have blood on the blade. I'm sure any of you who've, done kitchen stuff with knives will know, if you just get the kitchen knife after you've been carving some steak and flick it at the sink, yes, and blood will come off, but you'll still have stuff on your blade. Anyway, don't think it would magically clean your blade, but I think that's what that's signifying. Okay, so the little two, I think that's like, I don't know if it's based on anything. It could be from Chinese, but it's probably Filipino martial arts again. It could be Korean. I don't know, actually. I don't know much about Korean martial arts. I know historically there are Korean sword treatises. I've got one on one of my bookshelves up there, actually. But I don't know if they still do two-sword stuff in Korea. But yeah, he just did a little flourish, I guess, to show that he's ready to fight. But he looks tired. So, just a little thing for those who don't know, holding the sword two-handed obviously gives you more leverage, and it gives you more leverage against the opponent's blade as well. So if the opponent tries to smack the sword aside, you can just resist it because you've got two hands and they've got one hand. However, the disadvantage to using a sword two-handed is it brings your body more square on, brings both shoulders forward and makes you a broader target and brings more of your body closer to the opponent. If you hold a sword in one hand, you can reach further because it goes further from your body with one hand without having to hold with the other hand. And of course it means that therefore your body's further away from the opponent and they've got less of a target. The target's the hand, the arm and this side of your body, but this whole side of my body is now further away from the opponent. Personally, because I'm more of a saber fencer than a longsword fencer these days, I would definitely, with a small sword, well, short sword should we call it, like this, or like this, I would definitely use this one-handed, not two-handed personally. Yeah, so he's using it a bit like a katana now, which is similar. Obviously, they have the Korean version of kendo as well, which they imported from Japan, but they used to have two-handed sword, traditional two-handed sword use in Korea. So he's using it more like a katana. Oh, in fact, and this is kenjutsu at this point. It's basically, halfway between kendo and kenjutsu what he's doing. So he's doing standard Japanese sword guards. So he is using it as a katana. So you'll notice he's having to move his sword a lot because the opponent's got two weapons. So each time the opponent attack, boom, 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 he's got to deal with a lot of things. So he's having to move much more quickly than the opponent. If they were both moving at the same speed, the person with two swords does have an inherent advantage. That was really nice actually, because there was sort of voiding, and this does happen in fencing, that sometimes you go to attack someone, you see that you're going to get hit at the same time, so you back off. They maybe swoosh at you and realise they've left a line uncovered, they back off. So very often we do move around each other and we do a lot of movements, but the swords don't actually clash, and I actually really, really like that. It's really realistic. Okay, so he's using it one-handed now to thrust. Love it. That's sensible because he has a longer blade. So there are two things he can do to the opponent now. Even though the opponent's got two weapons, he has shorter weapons, the machete. He can outreach with the thrust, so he can thrust without being in range to be cut back. But moreover, he could also, maybe he'll do this, he could also aim for legs without being in danger distance, but he can also aim at the person's hands. Now, spoiler, they don't do that in this, but they, in a real fight, because it would end the fight too quickly, in a real fight, person with a machete, no handguard, aim at the hands. Okay, always aim at the hands. Right, let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. Hold on, let's just go back a bit. So he did go for the leg. I knew he was going to go for the leg. So I've seen that before. Thrust. Good, perfect. Did you notice he went thrust, got the person backing off. He went high line, get the person's weapons high, then snipe at the leg. this is one of my favourite moves. So I can guarantee you it works because I do it on a regular basis, a couple of times a week. So getting the person's weapons high to defend their high line and then quickly going down at the leg. It's even easier when you've got a longer weapon, for example, rapier versus sabre. Going for the thigh, great, hobbles the person's leg, you might even hit an artery. Oh, he's angry now. Cut. And there we go. That's the end of the fight. So, I really liked it actually. I really like this as a movie fight, and I recommend that you look it up. It's called Revenger from 2018. If you look for Revenger 2018 sword fight on YouTube, you can find the whole thing and watch it without me talking over the top. But I actually really liked it. Really good fight. I have, because it's my job, I have pointed out the things which I think are a bit silly or which he should do if he was doing in real life. But as a movie sword fight, I actually really like it. This is better than a lot of Hollywood rubbish, essentially. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. Requests for other movie sword fights or TV sword fights, any other sword fights, or even other weapon fights as well, spears, knives, whatever. Get posting in the comments down below if you'd like to make recommendations, because I do check those and that's where I got ideas for new ones. So I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Please make sure you're subscribed. It really helps the channel and helps other people to find it. And I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.